put together a list of 4 things to look at when purchasing a vacant piece of land as an investment. I've also included number 5 bonus tip at the end of the video. Definitely want to check that out and definitely want to make sure your land has that if you're looking at purchasing a piece of property. Before we get into it, if you would, please subscribe to the channel and I thank you for watching the video today. First one you're going to want to know, without question, definitely want to know allowable uses. I've said it before, just because you own the land or you're purchasing the land doesn't mean that there aren't other people that are going to tell you what you can and cannot do with the property. And what I mean by that is zoning restrictions as well as deed restrictions that may be on the piece of property. You want to know what jurisdictions your piece of property falls under, and by jurisdictions I mean city and county governments that have regulations in place. You want to know their regulations, and I'm talking about some examples of zoning regulations are residential use, commercial, industrial use properties, agricultural zoning. There's also like historical and arts districts that a property may fall under that's subject to more scrutinization and more jurisdiction as far as what can and cannot be done with the property. There's subsets within zoning as well, and there's also deed restrictions that can be put on by a private developer or a private seller as a condition of selling the property. These might include minimum or maximum building size, the type of construction as far as how the building should look when it's done if you are going to build it. And when you're doing land deals, you need to keep in mind what the end use will be. So if you're buying and selling land for profit, you're going to want to keep your end user in mind. So you want to know what deed restrictions are going to restrict your prospective buyer down the road. It may also, in commercial properties, it's going to tell you what kind of businesses can and cannot operate on that piece of land. It may be light commercial, light industrial. They may have restrictions against like automotive businesses. They use a lot of loud tools, pawn shops, and things like that. The best point of contact, you will always want to be working with a knowledgeable and experienced realtor in that area that you're looking at buying land at, and bounce some ideas off of them and get their thoughts on the area and the zoning and use regulations of a particular area. Also contact the building department, building and development departments for your jurisdictions, and ask them, if you're looking at particular properties or a particular area, you may ask them what the rules are as far as zoning and regulation and things like that. Also, if you can get a copy of a zoning and use map, most cities have them, smaller cities have them, bigger cities definitely have them. And those zoning and use maps are going to show you on a map, different areas of the city and allow you to target, what you're looking for. You also want to look, this is getting into tip number 2 here, previous uses of the property, what it was used for before, if there was any structures or buildings or houses or business buildings on the property before, and why they're not there anymore. Just because it's vacant today, it's a vacant piece of property today, doesn't mean it's always been that way. Fires and bulldozers create vacant land and vacant lots. Maybe the city knocked it down. Maybe a fire happened or something like that, or some sort of natural storm came in there and knocked the building down. So the previous use could indicate, but doesn't always guarantee, what your potential buyer would use the land for, or what you could possibly use the land for if you're approaching it for your own use. Why is it there no more? It's a good question to ask, what happened to it, and best point of contact to find out what, if anything, was previously on the lot is definitely talk to the seller that you're dealing with. But if it's like an estate or some disinterested party that doesn't have much history with the property, they may not know, but the neighbors that have been around there for a while, they're going to know history about that lot and that piece of property. The county tax rolls, if you can go back in the historical years prior, those will also show you what improvements were on there, because they were getting taxed. So they're taxing the land value, but they're also normally taxing the improvements that were on the property or are currently on the property. Previous structures, if they were there, can also lead to tip number 3, what we're going to talk about there, and that's liens. So if there was a previous structure there and it's not there no more, something happened to it, and it may bring up liens in a lot of situations. They're the boogeyman of vacant land investing. You can't see them, but they're definitely there. And so you want to know if it's there, and it's not necessarily a deal killer, don't get me wrong, but you definitely want to know that they're there. And this may be the motivation for this person selling it, is that it's got liens And if you ever dealt with a property with liens as the owner, you're going to get letters constantly threatening to sue you, threatening collections, sending you letters telling you how much money you owe. So it can be stressful for a property owner that doesn't have any plans or doesn't have the resources to remove the liens. They may just throw up their hands and say, I just want to sell it. So that can be the motivation, but you definitely want to know about the liens and know everything about them. Can come, and they can come from a variety of sources too. It can come from the city. You know, if the grass was getting tall and they went out and mowed the grass, they're going to charge a lien for that mowing, that cleanup. If there was a house or a building on there before and they had to go in and board up the house because they were having problems with homeless populations or transient populations using that property, they may have gone and boarded up the house, boarded up the doors and stuff. So they're going to charge for that too. I bought a property that had board ups and weeds, and every time they went out and mowed the grass, there was a new lien put on the property. When I bought it, I had to take care of all those liens. And if there was a previous building on there that they knocked down, they're going to attach those charges to the property, and that's a demolition lien. Probably comes from the city or the county or whoever deals with that. You can also be dealing with judicial liens that came from some sort of court ordered judgment, child support judgments. Somebody lost a lawsuit and there's a lien attached to that, all their assets, and that piece of property was an asset. So you want to keep an eye out for those as well. You just want to know, when you're dealing with liens, a few things. You want to know who has the lien, how many liens are on the property, and how much the liens are for. And also you want to know how much it's going to cost to get those liens taken care of, to get them removed. Now, that how much the liens are for and how much it's going to cost to get them removed are not the same thing. You may have interest on top of the original liens. You're going to have fees like administrative fees, fees to take the lien off, and all that's going to be piled on top of it. Keep in mind also that some of these parties have these liens on these properties and they expect never to get paid on them. They may have forgotten about it or it's way in the back of their mind. And so they may be, and not all the time, but maybe sometimes willing to negotiate a settlement of a lower price to remove the lien. So keep that in mind. And any settlement offers, you may ask them how, get all that information, how much is the lien for, and then ask them if that's a negotiable amount, and get any settlement or negotiations in writing. And a title company is going to be your best point of contact on these liens. If they're a good local title company that's familiar with it's all in the courthouse documents, they're going to dig up any liens on the property. So when you do a title search, when it goes to escrow and the title company's handling the sale, they'll come up with all the liens and they should get all that together as well, as far as how much it's going to cost and everything. So also ask the seller if they know of any liens. They may not. They may know there's some, but they may not know the full depth of it. So keep that in mind as well. Another thing that you can run across when buying land, and even if you don't run across it, you want to be familiar with the different elevations, flood zones, and possible wetlands on the property. Most likely want to avoid if there's wetlands. I'm not saying I've never bought property with wetlands or never sold property with wetlands, but it can get very complicated. There can be protections against that property, against developing that property, or any of the uses that you may have in mind for that property. So you definitely want to have a good understanding, but it can be very complicated and hard to understand if you're not familiar with it. I try to avoid if possible. If you are doing research or you think that there's possibility of wetlands in your area, especially if you're in like a coastal area or something like that, or you're near different bodies of water and things, you can just Google National Wetlands Inventory, and there's a wetlands mapper on there you can zoom in on the whole country. You can go to any particular area and it'll give you an overview of what's there. And then to dig a little bit deeper, if you want to go further than that, I would get with like a local environmental firm that does, environmental studies, wetland abatement, things like that. Just kind of pick their brain, ask them some questions, tell them you want to get a full picture of what's on that property, and then go from there and get your checkbook ready. Flood zones are normally identified, where I've seen them at is when I get a survey done The surveyor that I use will normally put if the property is on a flood zone or what flood zone it's in, maybe like a type X, type VZ. There's different letters and different zones as far as, their likelihood to flood basically. Surveyor is the best point of contact for that. So get with a knowledgeable local surveyor and ask them about flood zones. You can also hire them to do like an elevation or hub certificate on the property to tell you exactly where the elevation of your property is. And that'll kind of help you realize what the likelihood or what you're looking at as far as flood zones and if you're in a low level area and things like that. And as an investment, you need to know that properties with a higher flood risk obviously are going to have less desirability, maybe less value. So just keep that in mind when you're doing your research on buying land as far as elevations, flood zones, and wetlands. That just touches on it a little bit. You could do a whole lot of research on those three topics by themselves. Number 5, though, bonus tip of the day that you're going to want to know if you're buying land for any use at all is what utilities are available to the property. What utilities are currently available. You can look around, you can look up and say, oh, there's power lines there. So it's probably pretty close by that I could hook up to power. If there's a water spigot in the yard there, you can know that there was probably water here at some point, either from a well or from a municipal water source or something like that. So you want to kind of do a visual survey of what's there. But if they're not there and it's just a raw piece of land, you want to talk to any utilities departments, give them the address of the property and ask if it's ever had like a utility account. It's normally my first step. If they say yes, it has, well, then you can kind of say, well, did it have water, gas, what utilities were there? And then if it's not there, you want to ask what it would cost to get the utilities there. What would it cost to get water to this property? What would it cost to get sewer and things like that? Everything that you would want to develop a property, those utilities. You want to find out a cost estimate, and then you can add them to the property if it's cost effective and if it will increase the value of the property. It at least gives you more information to work off of before you purchase the property. And then another thing to keep in mind, just because there's water lines in front of the property or the neighbor has water and this neighbor has water and sewer and things like that, you're still going to have to tap into those. So be familiar with tap fees is what they're normally called. And that's just tapping your property into it so where you can use those lines that are maybe there in front of the property. And you talk to the utilities department again and ask them, what are the tap fees for water, for sewer, for gas, whatever you're dealing with. You want to find out what the tap fees are. The electric lines, you want to call your utility providers and make sure that it's there. They normally do a site visit. If they have to add a utility pole or something like that. So you want to keep all those things in mind when dealing with utilities. If they can't get water there, if they can't get sewer services there, if they don't have road access or trash pickup, all those things can add to or take away from the value of a piece of property. And normally the utilities that I'm looking at, that I'm asking, does this property have, is water, sewer, natural gas. You want to make sure you got road access. Is there garbage pickup in the area? Those are some of the main ones. Internet access, sure, but you can get that. That one was more important, back in the day, but now it's sat, there's options. But those are the main ones that you're looking for, because if there's no trash pickup there, maybe there's a private trash service that'll pick up their trash, but that's kind of a hassle, or they have to burn their trash or something like that, which you just want to know these things. Is there municipal water there? Is there any sort of water cooperatives close by that are servicing that area? Or do they have to drill a well? Is that even a possibility? Do they have sewer lines there? Or do you have to add septic systems to the property? You want to know all those things. Is there road access there? Who maintains that road? Is that a county maintained road? Is it just the people on that live along that road that need to maintain it? Or is this just a perfect city street and it's obvious that it's there? So you want to keep all those things in mind when looking at, buying or developing or investing in vacant land, building a house. You want to make sure all that stuff's there before you even purchase the property. So keep all these things in mind. I hope these 4 tips plus the bonus number 5 tip, which I know you loved, I hope they were all helpful to you. There's other things that you're going to want to keep in mind as well. Remember, when purchasing land, it can be very localized, as a lot of real estate is. So something that may not be common that I would look into in my area, you may need to look into in your area even more so. Um, just ask lots of questions to these local entities, these service providers and things like that, your neighbors, your realtors in that area. That's a wrap on that one. Anything I left out though, or anything that you found out that you had to deal with when purchasing land, please drop it in the comments. Let me know. I appreciate you checking out the channel. If you would, subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one.